प्रोग्राम में तो डाला नहीं है, किस तरह से बोलेंगे वो, किस कैपेसिटी में?
No, sir. He's just helping us go live on YouTube, and
Technical
we are
support,
live
sir.
now.
I'm just wanting technical support.
Yes, I just over to Mitra Ranjan ji now.
Oh, let him speak.
थैंक्स सृजिता। बजट पे अभी आज जो हम लोग राइट टू एजुकेशन और जो यूनियन बजट अभी आया है 1 फरवरी को, उस पर हम लोग का ये वेबिनार अभी इस पर आधारित है और हम लोग इसको शुरू करने जा रहे हैं। इसके पहले हमारे साथ इस वेबिनार में प्रोफेसर मुचकुंद दुबे जी हैं, जो काउंसिल फॉर सोशल डेवलपमेंट के प्रेसिडेंट हैं और राइट टू एजुकेशन के काफ़ी सख्त कहें कि पैरोकारी करते रहे हैं, शिक्षाविद हैं। उनका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है इस वेबिनार में। हमारे साथ प्रोफेसर प्रवीण झा हैं, जो न केवल प्रचलित अर्थों में अर्थशास्त्री हैं, बल्कि कॉमन पीपल के क्या एस्पिरेशंस हैं उसके हिसाब से पूरे फिनांस और पूरे बजट को एनालाइज करने में उनकी विशेषज्ञता है। और निश्चित तौर पे इस तरह के अर्थशास्त्रियों का अभी इस दौर में महत्व और भी बढ़ जाता है। प्रोफेसर प्रवीण झा का बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। हमारे साथ डॉक्टर ज्योत्सना झा हैं, जो सेंटर फॉर बजट एंड पॉलिसी स्टडीज की डायरेक्टर हैं और वो लगातार नीतिगत विषयों को लेकर के बजट की एनालिसिस करती रही हैं। उनका इस वेबिनार में बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। हमारे साथ डॉक्टर सुकन्या बोस हैं, जो इस बजट और फिनांस के मसले पे उनकी भी महारत है और वो लगातार फोरम के साथ भी जुड़ करके और इस पर काम करती रही हैं। उनका इस वेबिनार में हम स्वागत करते हैं। हमारे साथ डॉक्टर निरंजन आराध्या हैं, जो कर्नाटक आरटी फोरम के प्रांतीय संयोजक हैं और हमारे एस्टीम्ड मेंबर हैं, बल्कि कहें कि राइट टू एजुकेशन फोरम के फाउंडर मेंबर हैं और लगातार विकास के सवाल पे, राइट टू एजुकेशन के इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के सवाल पे उनका काफ़ी काम रहा है। उनका बहुत बहुत स्वागत हम करते हैं। और इसके साथ ही इस पूरे वेबिनार में आए हुए तमाम प्रतिभागियों का, जो पूरे देश भर से जुड़े हुए हैं, हमारे राज्य के कन्वेनर्स हैं, हमारे अन्य नेटवर्क के साथी हैं, उन सबका इस वेबिनार में बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। एक बात इसके पहले मैं कहना चाहूँगा कि आज हम इस पूरे बजट के एनालिसिस जब हम कर रहे हैं तो ये कोरोना महामारी के बाद का ये दूसरा बजट है और निश्चित तौर पे जो एक मोटे तौर पे बात समझ में आती है कि ये बजट आम लोगों के लिए नहीं है और कम से कम शिक्षा में जो चीजें दिखी हैं वो काफी असमानता को बढ़ाने वाला, डिजिटल एजुकेशन को फोकस में रखते हुए और सार्वजनिक शिक्षा व्यवस्था या उसके लोकतांत्रिकरण या उसके पूरे सार्वभौमिकरण की तरफ या राइट टू एजुकेशन के इम्प्लीमेंटेशन की तरफ की कोई भी चिंता सरकार की का ये बजट जाहिर नहीं करता है। तो निश्चित तौर पे एक बड़ी कठिन परिस्थिति में हम लोग इस बजट की एनालिसिस करने के लिए बैठे हैं। पिछले साल 6,000 करोड़ रुपए की कटौती हुई थी बजट में, इस बार वही तकरीबन 6,000 करोड़, पिछले बार जो कटौती हुई थी उससे कुछ कम ही बजट में बढ़ोतरी हुई है। लेकिन उस बजट का फोकस कहाँ पे है, ये हमारे आगामी जो वक्ता हैं वो काफी बारीकी से उसका विश्लेषण करेंगे। लेकिन ये जरूर हम कहना चाहेंगे कि निश्चित तौर पे जब तक हम पूरे बजट को और पूरे सरकार की जो मंशा है, जो उसका पॉलिटिकल विल है, वो कहीं भी शिक्षा को लेकर के संजीदा नहीं दिखता है और न ही देश के करोड़ों करोड़ बच्चों के भविष्य को लेकर के उनकी कोई चिंता, उनके अधिकारों को लेकर के कोई चिंता इस बजट में जाहिर होती है। बाकी अभी हम लोग इस विषय पे चर्चा करेंगे। ये पूरी बैठक प्रोफेसर दुबे जी की अध्यक्षता में होगी और उसके बाद फिर हमारे बाकी वक्ता 12 से 15 मिनट का एक वक्त है, उसमें वो लोग बात करेंगे। थैंक्स सर, ओवर टू यू।
थैंक यू। डॉक्टर प्रवीण झा आ गए? शायद नहीं आया।
जी जी आ गए सर, आ गए।
आ गए? अच्छा।
हाँ, आ गए।
जी जी जी।
क्योंकि मैं चाहता हूँ कि मैं जो बोलूँ उसको कम से कम हमारे पैनल के लोग तो सुने, और ज्यादा लोग नहीं भी सुने तो कोई हर्ज नहीं है। तो I don't have really very much to say by way of opening remarks. I think that the RTE forum has taken a very timely and important initiative in organizing this webinar, and I congratulate them for that. If we look at the budget from the perspective of the RTE Act, one very conspicuous thing that we find is that there is no mention of RTE anywhere in the budget speech of the finance minister. And not only that, but there is no mention of any long-term objective in the field of education or the time targets for achieving those objectives. ये अमृत काल में शिक्षा के लिए कोई अमृत कलश पेश नहीं किया गया है। ये बहुत this is an obvious fact. Universalization, there is no talk about universalization in the budget. There is no indication of the resources required for attaining the objectives, and basically the responsibility for further action has been passed on to the state, and they have been asked to make use of the this digital program or platform to provide supplementary education who were deprived of their the opportunity for learning during the pandemic period. So I think it is not necessary that all of this must be mentioned in the budget, but the sad fact is that we don't find these objectives and these resource requirements, the commitment to timeline mentioned anywhere else from any other platform or at any level of significant political significance. So I think what is quite clear is that the central government doesn't want to get pinned down to any specific objective or any time target. And it is basically diverting attention from it by putting emphasis on the digital mode for providing education. This could at best have been a supplementary mode. Nobody can deny the significance of technology or digital method of approaching problems and subjects in this age of ours. And this could very well have come as a supplementary methods for limited purpose and for strengthening what I would call the mainstream effort, which cannot but be offline learning, face-to-face learning under the, if I can use a traditional term, under the feet and the guidance of a teacher. There is no alternative to that, at least for the vast majority of the children of the country. So the position that we see today in the field of education is that the nation is without a compass, without a radar, or without any indication of where we want to reach, in what time period, and at what phases. On the other hand, the current developments are widening the division in the field of education between the children of the well-to-do households, which would hardly constitute 20 to 25% of the population, and the children of the poor and the marginalized families, which constitute more than 80% of the Indian population. The second trend that we find is there is an obvious effort to expedite or accelerate the process of privatization of education in India, particularly the privatization of school education. Even this emphasis on digital education is a move in the same direction, because you know, the section to be profited maximum from this move are the national and multinational companies which are in the field of edu business, and which devise these technological mode and which deploy massive resources for propagating these modes, mobilizing the support of the government for this purpose. And this is moving at a very fast speed. We know that the educational divide accentuates the social divide, and we are witnessing education as yet another area which is going to contribute to the growing inequality of income, wealth, and social status in the country. I would just limit myself to these remarks of a general nature, and will not go into the details of what is provided in the budget, what is the significance of the figures in the budget, and because I'm sure that we have in the panel experts far more qualified and far more up to date on this subject than I am. I would just like to flag one point before I conclude, and it is that the position that we see in India of regarding opening of schools during the period of pandemic. I think all conceivable logic and scientific evidence would suggest that schools should be the first to open and the last to close. This is a practice which is being followed by most of the developed countries in the world, and quite a number of the more developed among developing countries, particularly South Africa and others. But the trend in India is in the other direction. Here, the schools are most hurriedly closed, and there is extreme reluctance and all kinds of political pressure to open them, to prevent opening them, really, when the situation seems to improve in relative terms. A lot of politics is played at that time, which section of the vote bank you can appeal to by this kind of policy, and not really the interest of the children who have been losing their learning, opportunities for the last 2 years or so, with disastrous implications, not only for them personally and as a group, but also for the nation as a whole. There are, of course, certain variations in the among the states, and recently the Maharashtra has taken bold and courageous step in this direction. But in contrast, Delhi seems to be stuck to the most conservative path. I think the schools here have remained closed for most of the period of the pandemics. And even now there is a reluctance to open them for our children. I think RTE Forum has taken the view that the schools should not be closed unless the situation is really grave and cannot be managed and handled by traditional means, and should be opened with the earliest possible indication of their being able to function effectively and efficiently. And we stick to this view even now, and I take advantage of this forum to underline this point. So with this, I conclude my opening remark, and I will now call upon the speakers to make their comments and confine them, as Niranjan has said, to 15 to 20 minutes to maximum. So can I now request Professor Jha to make his comments?
Thank you very much, sir. It's very nice to be part of this panel chaired by Professor Dubey and very, very distinguished panelists who have been working on these issues for a while. Pleasure to be here, privilege to be here. Let me first of all acknowledge that as context setting, very perceptive remarks, which we have just heard from Professor Dubey, sets the tone extremely well. We know that state of education in this country has been in a serious crisis for quite a while, but during the pandemic, this crisis has become almost a catastrophe. The kind of proportion it has assumed in terms of various indicators connected to the health of this particular sector are extremely worrisome, and somehow there is complete disregard for it within the North Bloc, South Bloc, and many other blocks where powers reside. Now, this is deeply, deeply disturbing. Right? Before I come to some of the numbers and issues connected with education per se, we also need to note, and this is just building on what Professor Dubey said, that given the fact that pandemic has destroyed income, livelihoods, consumption, etc., for a very substantial segment of the population. According to different estimates, several surveys are doing the rounds, 60 to 80% of the population has actually seen a compression in income. Now, this is an amazing figure. The highest figure which is being reported is 84% of the population in the country, right? If you look at the bottom quintile, according to some surveys, it is almost 53, 54% of income being lost, right? So it's a massive mayhem in terms of basic economic context for very, very large segment of the population, overwhelming majority of the population. Now, what happens in such situations in terms of the fallout? One of the things which gets hit very hard is expenses, etc., that such families make on education, make on their children in terms of putting them into some context of learning, etc. Right? That is why the state ought to have needed to become much more proactive. Yeah, of course, state should have done a lot more in terms of overall income also, but given the fact that it was not doing that, at least for this sector, yeah, there should have been a lot more attention, lot more care in terms of putting in place a set of policies and the money to back those policies, which could have ensured at least continuity of learning for children at large. As Professor Dubey mentioned, we opted for an ostrich-like response. Just close the schools, right? And what do you do along with closure of the school? Shift to online education. Now, given the digital divide in this country, everybody knows it. Hell of a lot has been written about, again, the kind of challenges, the problems associated with digital divide. We already have any number of surveys in the last couple of years, how this impacted on the learning outcomes and so on. Let me just quote one survey, for instance. This has been put together by the CBGA team. It's looking at various surveys, etc., and it reports that in one survey, which is a survey of 15 states of 1,400 underprivileged rural children, it reports that only 8% children could study online regularly. Now just imagine, only 8%. Right? And there are several other surveys which give you pretty similar and frightening kinds of outcomes with respect to education. So what I would like to emphasize as my first point is that in the context of the pandemic, all the fault lines in provisioning of social sectors in general, right, and education in particular, were exposed dramatically. All these came not only to the surface in deeply worrisome ways, but they were staring at our face and nothing was done. Right? Let me also note a point which is very well established in the literature, that there are very few countries in the world where education and health inequalities in terms of indicators, provisioning, etc., tend to be worse than income inequality compared to India. India already has high levels of income inequality. Again, lots of surveys, lots of reports have come. All of us are aware of that. But India is one of the few countries in the world where, when it comes to social sector inequalities, things are much worse than consumption or income inequalities. Right? Professor Amartya Sen repeatedly says that India must be one of the very few, possibly the only country among the large countries which wants to become an economic superpower without paying any attention to its education and health. So the kind of neglect that we have had over the years, in particular during the neoliberal era, right? But even before that, we clearly had not done enough. All these were exposed brutally in the context of the pandemic. Right? As many colleagues working on education keep reminding us that we are in a state of education emergency. Right? It's such a terrible kind of context that we need to take measures which are required in emergency. Okay, if you have health emergency, if you have livelihood emergency, and so on and so forth. Right? If you look at what happened in the context of the pandemic again, right? Social sector expenditures, a study of some 26 states. I think Sukanya might get into some of these figures later. This is a study from NIPFP. Right? It tells you that it kind of remained more or less stagnant as regards some states. We have a situation of slight improvement in education between 1920 and 2021. That is over the period of just the year before the pandemic and 2021, the last year. Right? Health, which was obviously considered far more serious issue because it was indeed matter of life and death. Right? Most of these states did pay a little more attention, but education, when we were in this crisis situation, there was very little attempt. Yes, a handful of states did try to improve a little bit in terms of their allocation, spending, etc. Not the union government. Right? Anything in terms of flow from the union government, etc., as you know, that states have been in dire straits because of delayed fund flows under GST and other provisions and so on. So this is the broader context that we need to keep in mind to look at what has been done in this particular budget. I'll just take about 5 minutes more so that other panelists can expand on very, very important arguments and ideas, which are indeed there to talk about. Now, if we look at union government spending on education and look at, let's say, 21-22 BE, nominal terms, it was 93,225 crores. In nominal terms, it has increased to 1,04,277 crores. Right? Of course, if you make adjustment for inflation, the return, the increase is relatively less. But yes, in nominal terms. However, the ratios which we should be looking at, which is far more important to examine and so on. Given the nature of education emergency that Professor Dubey highlighted, and I kind of underscored that further, it is what kind of expenditure ratios we have as a percentage of union government budget or as a percentage of GDP. Right? That gives you a much more serious sense of the intent. So 21-22 BE compared to that, what we have in 22-23 BE, it has come down from 2.7 to 2.6. And as I noted earlier, that this union budget or the union government did not do anything as the pandemic was deepening and so on. So if you look at the revised estimate for the last year, it was in fact 2.3. So from 2.7, it had come down to 2.3 revised estimates. So you can see the kind of compression which we have there. I mean, it's amazing, the kind of cussedness, disregard which you have there. If you look at as a percentage of GDP, right? Sort of in 21-22, it was 0.42 union government spending on education as a percentage of GDP, right? In the current allocation, it has come down to 0.40. And again, if you look at as a share of GDP in terms of revised expenditure for the financial year which just got concluded, it had come down from 0.42 to 0.38. Okay? In other words, instead of expanding the fiscal space in any meaningful sense, right, there has been total disregard, as I said. Right? The only positive you can talk about here is that, okay, this nominal expenditure has gone up, but who knows what will happen to the revised expenditure? And take into account the inflation, right? In any case, this nominal expenditure is nowhere sort of what we would have expected for education as a sector, because the deficits there, as we have said repeatedly on the RTE forum, we have had lots of discussions on this. The deficits are huge. Again, RTE, different surveys keep reminding us that some barely 90% barely 10% or so of schools are sort of RTE compliant in terms of various norms. If you take all the norms, right? So the deficits have been huge, and question of unit cost, etc., all that is well known. So let me not get into that. Second point, to the extent that, if you look at various reports, Pink Press in particular, what are the things being highlighted? That two very innovative things have been done. What is this? I'm sorry that I can't stop laughing when such funny things get bandied about. That one class, one TV channel of PM E-Vidya program would be expanded from 12 to 200 TV channels. And the press is gaga. The business press is, clapping sort of as if the roof will burst, right? And along with that, this digital university and so on. So basically, as Professor Dubey was rightly pointing out, to the extent that you see some signals, it is to strengthen digitization, it is to strengthen online education, it is to strengthen sort of, much of it is never said, but basically backdoor privatization and so on. And once you start looking at the details, all that becomes very, very clear, right? As we know, costs of school closures have been hugely unequal for different segments and so on, which again was highlighted by Professor Dubey. Just a few numbers. If you look at the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan and what was initially intended, this was supposed to be a 5-year, so when it was announced, it was it had a 5-year time frame. And if you remember that, what was the allocation in the first year and what was sort of expected in the context of the kind of situation we are in because of the pandemic, it should have been substantially higher. But no, there is no such signal. But in general, I mean, some of these major heads, if you look at that, again, I would compare budget estimates, sort of, as it happens, the revised estimates I've already indicated to you are lower for almost all these, right? So, which basically showed extremely callous response from the government vis-a-vis this particular sector under different heads and so on. So I'll not get into that, just give you a sense of different BE numbers for the 2 years, 21-22 and 22-23. So Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, it shows an increase of roughly about 6,000 crores or so. If we look at something which is extremely critical, midday meal, PM Poshan, yeah, that has come down in terms of budgetary allocation from 11,500 crores to 10,234 crores. Whatever sort of significant increase we had, it was largely on a couple of heads. Beyond that, if you look at, let's say, scholarship for students with disabilities, yeah, that has gone down. If you look at something as critical as National Child Labor Project, right, that has come down drastically from 120 crores, which in any case was measly, to 30 crores, right? So let me not get into many further details about the numbers. This gives you a sense of complete washout in terms of either education as a whole, school education. You know, if you look at early childhood care and education, ECCE, yeah, it does not emerge as a priority in any sense, right? So on the whole, I mean, it's an utterly disappointing kind of budget. But then, as Professor Dubey rightly said, that we should be asking about what this budget achieved maybe 25 years down the road, when the Amrit Kal is, will probably be close to the conclusion. Right. So with that, sir, thank you. And I mean, this kind of utter lack of attention and seriousness to this sector, in my assessment, has been unprecedented in the last several years that I have been looking at the budget, especially because of the context. The context was so sort of distressing, heartrending. And in that, what do you do? So thank you, sir, for the time. And I hope if there are some questions, I can clarify further. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Jha. As usual, your intervention has been very rich, substantively, and perceptive, and above all, provocative. And this is what we need in a discussion like this. So I will now call upon Dr. Niranjanaradhya to take the floor. He has been a professor in development education in our most prestigious law university in the country, and has been consistently working in this area, both through field activities as well as by theoretical analysis, has many publications on this subject, and he has kept himself completely updated on this subject. So I really look forward to hearing him. Professor Aradhya.
Good afternoon, Dubey ji. Thank you very much. But however, in the list, in the order, they have suggested my name at the end. I don't know whether like I can come in now.
That is my discretion.
Okay.
But if you are not prepared, then I can.
No. I am fine. I thought I could just.
Please, yeah. That is entirely my discretion.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dubey ji, for this opportunity. Certainly, your kind of chairship will certainly help us to take this particular debate further, like how the right to education, the implementation of right to education has been completely derailed in the country in a very deliberate kind of manner by diluting the entire law into a kind of just right on the paper. I just want to kind of bring in only some 3 to 4 important points from a common man perspective, in just a very common kind of lens as a parent who are sending their children to the government school. What is their expectations? What is they were looking for from this budget? What was their expectations, and how those expectations have been really fulfilled by the central budget is the really issue that we need to discuss. In my opinion, unfortunately, in this country, even after 12 years of making education a fundamental right and also enacting a legislation which was which has been in force from last 12 years, I personally feel that Amrita Galige has not yet come, to implement that piece of legislation. For me, allocation for implementation of right to education is not a choice. It is not a charity. It is a fundamental right. It's a fundamental right, and the central government as a duty bearer. It is very clearly mentioned in the legislation, what is the responsibility of the central, government. In fact, education being in the concurrent list, all of us know that education is the joint responsibility of the state as well as the central government, and the more responsibility on the central government because this is the legislation enacted by the center, and accordingly that kind of stress and that kind of focus has been provided in the Right to Education Act. Just to kind of recall again, if you look at Section 7 of the Right to Education Act, how obligation it is for the central government, it says very clearly, Section 7(2) very clearly state, the central government shall prepare, I just underline the word, shall prepare the estimates of capital and recurring expenditure for the implementation of the provisions of this act. This is a very, very important, provision. This is a very important provision. The act, there is no kind of choice, there is no kind of charity, there is no, kind of any scope left to the center. To take any kind of obligation. So this is a very clear obligation under the Right to Education Act that the center shall prepare the kind of estimates that is necessary for the implementation of Right to Education Act. But unfortunately, all of us know in the last 11 years, Act is very poorly implemented. To be honest with you, in some of the states, the percentage, if you look at the RTE complaints, in terms of percentage, it is as low as 1.3. It is as low as 1.3, whereas in the nation, if you take a national average, it is just about 25.5 national average. If you go with the same speed, take, for example, to reach 25.5%, we have taken almost 12 years. If you go with the same speed, even to implement the minimum norms and standards prescribed under the Right to Education Act, we may take 2080. So we may take such, such a long period, which is atrocious, which is a great injustice to the fundamental right, and in a way, it is completely subverting the constitutional right for children. So therefore, I think probably this is a very serious issue. I don't get into the numbers in the budget, but this clearly shows that the central government is not at all interested to implement the core provisions of the Right to Education Act, the minimum norms and standard, which is considered as one of the important provision under the Right to Education Act, which enables the schools to prepare the ground for kind of quality learning. So this is completely kind of unacceptable. So in my opinion, the budget has completely derailed the implementation of Right to Education Act. This is to begin with. Number two, the most important thing is, all of us know that this is already mentioned by the Professor Jha. Like there were a lot of expectations because of the pandemic. Pandemic has not just only deprived the learning for children, but also kind of the issues of nutrition, the issues of well-being, the issues of creating a very enabling environment back to the kind of reopening of schools. All these issues people were expecting lot of things. Take, for example, to address the issue of nutrition. As per their own kind of report released by the Niti Aayog, nearly about 42.5 percentage of people, particularly the girl children and women, are anemic. Nearly about 32.5 children are kind of very stunted growth. So all these issues shows that the budget could have given more allocations towards addressing these gaps, not only the learning deprivation gap, but also the nutrition, well-being, emotional socio-emotional issues of children. But unfortunately, nothing is mentioned. Nothing is not even they have not issued, they have not have even flagged these issues in the budget. Forget about addressing those issues. At least these issues could have been recognized, because we are passing through such a critical period, but we have not even recognized these issues. Forget about addressing those issues. So how do we address learning deprivation? No answers, because in most of the states, of course, I am very familiar with Karnataka. When Karnataka reopened the schools, they opened in such a way so that nothing happened to the children. Nothing, no learning, kind of deprivation, no learning, kind of loss. So the entire thing, just about 10 to 15 days, there was a bridge course. There was a bridge course conducted by the teachers. By the teachers themselves were in such a kind of position. They kind of started sharing with people like us that children have almost forgot everything what they have learned in the last 2 years. So that is the situation. But the state government was simply pushing them, to conduct the business as usual. To start, grade-wise teaching, no efforts, no conscious efforts to reorganize the syllabus, to reorganize, the curriculum, no efforts to at least make an honest assessment where exactly children stand. Suppose a child who got admitted in 2020-21 to class 1 has reached 22-23 class 3 without learning in class 1 and class 2. but we need to make an assessment. What kind of programs? How do we really redefine the curriculum so that we can address these, kind of serious learning gaps? Because unless we address these learning gaps, children may not be able to really move forward. So no such, no additional budget was given to address those core issues. Forget about implementing the right to education, even to address, as Professor Jha put it, it is an education emergency situation in India. Like, except Uganda, I think probably India is the country where schools were closed for a longest period. So when that is the situation, at least there could have been, kind of a clear, specific vision. What is that we are going to do for the next 1 year to make children to address, these learning gaps? So no such, kind of proposals, no such, kind of vision in the budget, because budget is basically a vision document which explains, what is that we are going to do for the next 1 year to address whatever the issues that we are addressing. But unfortunately, education is one completely neglected. The third issue which I just want to bring in, already Honorable Chair has mentioned about it. What is really ridiculous is that the whole world, through kind of concrete research demonstrated that online education is not a substitute for what is happening in the classroom. So because education is a social process, education is basically kind of a process of socialization. Children should come together, children should learn together, eat together. This is the socialization process. So therefore, whatever that we learn from education as a larger tool for social transformation. So like only the online education or education technology can only supplement this process. It cannot really substitute. But unfortunately, in the budget, the way that they have kind of highlighted that one channel for each grade, like, even what is very kind of surprising for me, where like we have worked for decades in the field of education, that we started demanding certain basic kind of facilities like science lab for upper primary classes, science lab for high schools, all these things. And what the budget is proposing, e-labs to conduct the experiments, e-lab for everything. So it means like basically it's a very clear agenda that the Indian education system, particularly the school education system, is moving away from the social constitutional mandate of ensuring social justice. I think it is very clear. It's very clear that the Indian state is moving towards catering only 20% of the affluent families, and almost kind of excluding 80% of the marginalized and the poor children who are coming from the marginalized and from a very poor families. So therefore, it's a very clear attempt. It's a clear attempt to snatch away the fundamental right, to take away the fundamental right from the marginalized, which was the product of the freedom struggle for nearly 150 years. As a result of the freedom struggle, I always recognize fundamental free and compulsory education as the product of the freedom struggle. Right from 1882, the Education Commission, popularly known as Hunter Commission, to the last 86th Amendment to the Constitution to make a education fundamental right, was a long journey, to get that fundamental right. But that fundamental right has been completely dishonored, has been completely, kind of sidelined, and not even as Dubey mentioned in his initial remarks, no reference in the budget, speech that they will take concrete measures for the implementation of the Right to Education Act. So therefore, it is very kind of clear from the budget. Certainly, whatever all of us as part of the forum members, whatever that our expectations to implement the Right to Education Act in a much more meaningful manner, in a holistic manner. I'm just talking only about the norms and standards. There are other provisions in the Right to Education Act, particularly Section 29, which talks about the quality education, which talks about, the kind of meaningful curriculum transactions, child-friendly, kind of methodology, and more importantly, the continuous and comprehensive evaluation to monitor, the learning process continuously. But on the other hand, all of us know that already there are, kind of proposals to conduct examinations right from class 3, class 5, class 8, class 10, class 12. So this is a very clear, kind of a proposal to completely, dismantle the right to education provisions. So it violates the basic, essence of ensuring at least 8 years equitable quality education to all children. So already preparations are on to conduct these testings and examinations. Therefore, what I personally feel, this entire discussion, like how the budget has completely, kind of, derailed the Right to Education Act, but also we need to have a, long-term plan from the Right to Education Forum. How do we really address these, issues? How do we really, because now it's very clear that there is no budget. Even whatever they have, increased around 6,663 crores as additional thing for the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. But if you give that, additional, whatever the total amount to all the state, it becomes completely, kind of, hardly any state receives around 1,500 to 2,000 crores. Imagine. Any state receiving just about 1,500 crores to implement Right to Education Act, where the level of gap of RTE compliance ranges from 1.3 to 63.3. 1.3 to 63 point, like it looks really complete. I don't know why the central government is unable to understand this very simple truth. Very simple truth. The very first step towards implementing the Right to Education Act is to respect that, the minimum norms and standards should be there in all schools. And it should be there in government schools to begin with, because it is the obligation on the state to provide the fundamental right. Any fundamental right has three important universal, characters. Number one, right to education, when we talk about as a fundamental right, it should be universal. It should be universal to all. Number two, it should provide equal opportunity for all children. It is the state obligation. State should create that kind of an opportunity. Third is, state has an also obligation to provide resources. But if you look at all the three things, even if you just examine these three things against, the state, the way that has been, kind of conducting in the last 7 years, all the three things have been completely, kind of missed, not only in the budget, even in their day-to-day deliberations, even if you look at the way that they are implementing the national education policy, is also completely, kind of keeping the Right to Education Act away. Not even a line mentioned in the new education policy about the, effective implementation of the a very important, piece of legislation in the independent India. So it shows very clearly that the budget has completely disappointing, and if it is not a very loaded word, it has completely failed to address the situation on the ground, particularly because of the pandemic. Not only the learning loss, but also preparing the schools, for reopening, and kind of providing budgets for the school management committees to get themselves ready for such reopening, addressing the socio-emotional issues of children apart from nutrition, of course, very importantly the learning process. But all these things are completely, kind of now in a very bad, we're almost moving from, bad to worse. There is no answer for all these issues. As a result of that, I think probably the kind of inequality what we had before pandemic and during the pandemic, and next, these inequalities, segregation and discrimination will further increase. As I said already, Indian education system is almost moving towards only catering to those who can afford for that. For the rest of the people, certainly it becomes kind of a distant dream. So as a result, the right to education, what we achieved after a long struggle, particularly after the Unikrishnan judgment in 1993, which made education a fundamental right, and also which flows from right to life. Right to life as an important fundamental right within the Constitution. So therefore, I think probably this is a very serious situation, if not exaggeration. I just want to read a paragraph from J.P. Naik, and I just conclude my presentation. I read what J.P. Naik's kind of understanding, the description of J.P. Naik at the end of 18th century about kind of availability of universal education to the masses. What J.P. Naik said in his book, Triangular, in his famous book, Equality, Quality, and Triangular Issues. I just quote: the Indian society was the highly stratified, hierarchical, and inegalitarian. There was a small group of well-to-do persons at the top, consisting of the feudal overlords and their dependents and supporters. The bulk of the people, however, were poor and underprivileged. The scheduled castes were treated as untouchables, and the scheduled tribes who were not integrated into the mainstream society formed the lowliest, the poorest, and the most exploited groups. So the education picture broadly reflected the socio-economic background of inequality. Access to the formal system of education was inscriptive, mostly based on birth, and restricted to the literary and priestly castes or classes, well-to-do landlords, money lenders, and traders, unquote. If I just read this, particular paragraph, similarly, I feel today's Indian education system is almost moving towards that. Now education is available only through those, have access to the gadgets, who have access to the online, and who have access to all things, or they should have access to buy something from Byju's. So unless you have that kind of a capacity, you are not really getting, kind of education, which was an important thing under the right to education. So with this, kind of pathetic situation, how do we really move forward is an issue, an important issue that need to be addressed by the Right to Education Forum, with the guidance of very senior people like Muchkund, Dubey and various other senior peoples who are part of the forum from the beginning, from 2010. I think probably we need to plan, a very systematic, way, systematic strategy to move forward to address this crisis. This is what from my side, just to share in this webinar. I hope all of us can, work collectively to really protect the fundamental right and to deserve whatever the due that it, kind of demands from the state. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Hope we'll, continue this dialogue.
Thank you very much. It's very comprehensive and very almost all the aspects related to the education system has come in. Leaves a lot for us to ponder about, and you have exceeded the time limit to some extent, but I expect it from an academic whose average engagement in the class is 1.5 hours. So now I give the floor to Jyotsna Jha, Dr. Jyotsna Jha.
Yeah, thank you, RTE Forum. Thank you, Professor Dubey, and also Professor Praveen and Niranjanaradhya for making points. When I was a child, I used to play with my father, and when we used to, I used to say, "Oh, I also thought so." He used to tell me, "Fools seldom differ." And I used to say, and then he would say, no, what I meant was great men and women think alike. So, so I always tell this joke to all my colleagues whenever we, discuss on things that, oh, we all think alike, because either we are, great men and women, or we are all fools. So here we are, all of us. I think for me, it's let down is the word. Even if one did not expect much, one did not expect this, and that's important to say. Others have said. I'll try to speak both in English and Hindi. हम लोग तब से यही बात कर रहे हैं कि सरकार ने जिस तरह की उदासीनता दिखाई है शिक्षा के प्रति, वो ऐसा नहीं था कि बहुत ज्यादा अपेक्षा थी, लेकिन ये अपेक्षा से कम होने की बात नहीं है। ये किसी भी यार्डस्टिक से हम देखें तो ये उससे भी कम है। और जो मुझे लगता है कि पूरे बजट का सच है, सिर्फ शिक्षा का ही सच नहीं है। इट्स लाइक वो डिजिटल गॉन मैड, इट्स समथिंग लाइक दैट, जहाँ पे डिजिटल पे इतना ज्यादा जोर दिया गया है जैसे डिजिटल हर चीज का सॉल्यूशन है। और वो एक वाइडर जो विकास के फ्रेम की बात है, तो मुझे लगता है कि ये जो पूरा अभी क्राइसिस है वो शिक्षा के बाहर भी बहुत बड़ा क्राइसिस है। जिस तरह से डिजिटल पे जोर दिया गया है तो शिक्षा में तो है ही है। हम सब लोगों ने बात की, हमारे से पहले भी, एवरीवन रेफर टू हाउ लिमिटेड इंटरनेट इज, बट आप अगर इसकी बात करते हैं, इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू काउंटर द काउंटर्स दैट कम। सी द मोमेंट यू से दैट टेक्नोलॉजी one is access limited है, सब कहेंगे which age do you live in, सबके पास मोबाइल फोन है, सबके पास एक, सबके पास नहीं है। that's the first lie और misconception। दूसरी बात है कि अगर है भी तो वो हर बच्चे को शिक्षा के लिए उपलब्ध नहीं है। So having family having one smartphone doesn't mean it's available and accessible for every child in the family। खास करके लड़कियों के लिए ज्यादा समस्या है, सबके लिए है, लड़कों के लिए भी है। और वो सारे सर्वेज ने दिखाए हैं, जो सर्वे हम लोगों ने RTE फोरम के साथ मिलकर किया था, 3000 से ज्यादा का सैंपल था, जहां पेरेंट्स भी 3000 से ज्यादा और बच्चे भी 3000 से ज्यादा इंटरव्यू किए थे। उसमें भी ये बहुत स्पष्ट था कि फोन का होना इस बात का इंडिकेटर नहीं है कि हम इंटरनेट के माध्यम से पढ़ सकते हैं। तो पहली बात ये। दूसरी बात टीवी की। नाउ लुक एट दिस, ऐसा नहीं है कि हमारे देश में पहली बार स्कूलों में टीवी जा रहा है और जो चैनल है वही नहीं देखा जाता है, तो हम चैनल 200 भी बना दें या 400 भी बना दें तो बच्चे उससे पढ़ लेंगे, ये हम कैसे मानेंगे। हम लोगों ने जो 4 राज्यों में ये स्टडी किया, वहां पे सी more than 50% had TVs in their homes। टीवी है, चाहे जिस तरह का भी हो, टीवी है। 52% लोगों के पास था। तो ऐसा भी नहीं है कि हर घर में टीवी है। 52% का मतलब है 48% के पास नहीं होना। सो दैट्स ऑल्सो इम्पोर्टेंट टू नो कि आज के दिन में भी एक इतने बड़े तबके के पास टीवी भी नहीं है। और उसमें से सिर्फ 11% बच्चों ने ये कहा कि कभी भी, ये नहीं कि रेगुलर देखते हैं, कभी भी उन्होंने एक बार they had ever watched one education program। तो ये तो है हमारे पहुंच, ये तो एक्सेस की बात। अब आइए आप, ये जो डिजिटल ई विद्या की बात है, तो आप आइए कि इसकी क्वालिटी क्या होती है। और हम सब कह रहे हैं, जैसे निरंजन आराध्या आप कह रहे हैं कि जो अफोर्ड कर सकते हैं, मुझे लगता है जो अफोर्ड कर सकते हैं उनके लिए भी ये अच्छी बात नहीं है, और वो करते भी नहीं है, वो इसको यूज करते हैं सप्लीमेंट्री में। You know, it's not that rich send their children only for Byju's tuitions and this. This is the supplementary thing for them. They have best of education, very highly, very activity-based, extremely discursive education. वो भेजते हैं अपने बच्चों को, और फिर वो सप्लीमेंट करते हैं बायजूस और इन चीज़ों से, ताकि वो हर तरह की लर्निंग को एक्सपोज हो सके। तो और इवन जैसे जो केंद्रीय विद्यालय वगैरह है, तो मेरा अपना अनुभव ये है कि वहाँ टेस्टिंग ज्यादा करते हैं, पढ़ाते कम है। वहाँ पे भी जो लगातार पढ़ाई हुई है पिछले 2 सालों से, वो टेस्टिंग पे ज्यादा फोकस है बजाय पढ़ाई पे। तो एक तो जो पूरा हमारा नेट बेस्ड एजुकेशन है, तो ऐसा भी नहीं है कि जिसके पास है साधन, उसमें उन बच्चों के लिए भी ये बहुत प्राइमरी माध्यम हो सकता है, सेकेंडरी माध्यम हो सकता है, और एक इमरजेंसी का माध्यम बना भी, तो उसको लेके अगर हम फंडामेंटल्स डिनाई करते हैं तो वो बहुत ही गलत बात है। एंड स्पेशली फॉर पुअर पीपल, इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू पॉइंट इट आउट कि सोशलाइजेशन की बात की निरंजन आराध्या ने, मैं उसको थोड़ा आगे ले जाके सोशल कैपिटल की बात करूंगी। मैं फिर एक अपनी बात लाती हूँ। हम लोग जब काम करते हैं, यहाँ मैं अपने ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की बात करती हूँ, जहाँ मैं 25 साल लगभग पुराना हमारा ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, मैं करीब 12 सालों से हूँ वहाँ, और हम लोग कहते हैं कि हमारा आधा डेटा तो सोशल कैपिटल के कारण मिलता है। अगर सरकार से डेटा चाहिए तो मैं देखती हूँ, अच्छा किस बैच, कौन सा है, कहाँ है, अच्छा ये जेएनयू में था क्या, अच्छा ये किस बैच का था, अच्छा किससे कांटेक्ट करें। सो वी ऑल यूज, अच्छा मैं इसको किस तरह से जान सकती हूँ, अच्छा मैं नहीं जानती होंगी तो दूसरे कौन, प्रोफेसर व्यासलू जानते हैं क्या, अच्छा इसको ढूंढो। सो वी ऑल survive because of our social capital in this society and in this economy. हमारा सोशल कैपिटल के बिना कुछ भी नहीं काम होता है। जहां हम पूरी ईमानदारी से काम करने की कोशिश करते हैं, वहां भी हम सोशल कैपिटल का इस्तेमाल करते हैं। तो सोशल कैपिटल कैसे बनेगा अगर आप इन बच्चों को स्कूल तक नहीं आने देंगे, इन बच्चों को आप कॉलेज नहीं आने देंगे, यूनिवर्सिटीज, पब्लिक यूनिवर्सिटीज तो धीरे धीरे रही नहीं जाएगी, तो वो कहाँ अपना सोशल कैपिटल बनाएंगे, जहां हम सब लोगों ने बनाया जिन पब्लिक यूनिवर्सिटीज के माध्यम से, और जब आज उसका हम फायदा उठा रहे हैं, वो ये गरीब बच्चे कहाँ जाएंगे, इनका तो कोई सोशलाइजेशन ही नहीं है, कोई जगह ही नहीं है जहाँ ये इंटरैक्ट कर सकते हैं दूसरे परिवारों से, दूसरे तरह के परिवारों से। और जो एक पूरा लर्निंग का एक डिस्कर्सिव एलिमेंट होता है, नॉन वर्बल कम्युनिकेशंस होते हैं। टीचर्स जो हैं हमारे में से वो सब जानेंगे कि नॉन वर्बल कम्युनिकेशंस होते हैं, जिसके आधार पे हम पढ़ाते लिखाते हैं, इवन वेबिनार्स करते हैं, सेमिनार्स तो करते ही हैं। तो कहाँ जाएंगे ये बच्चे अगर आप उनको उनका फंडामेंटल नहीं दे रहे हैं। और जब आप डिजिटल टीचर की बात पे उतर आते हैं, तो फिर तो वो मतलब द डिनायल इज कंप्लीट। और ये जब RTE बना था तो ऐसे ही नहीं आए थे उसके नॉर्म्स। और ये समय है कि हम उसकी बातें करें। मुझे याद है मैं RTE जो एक कमेटी बनाई थी, सरकार ने 3 कमेटियां बनाई थी उस वक्त, एक फाइनेंशियल रिसोर्सेज पे थी, एक लीगल बेसिस को देखने की थी। तो जो फाइनेंस वाला कमेटी था उसको सपोर्ट करने के लिए एक टास्क फोर्स बना था जिसमें मैं थी, ये पुरानी 20 साल पुरानी बात, और उसमें मैं थी। और मुझे याद है कि हर मीटिंग में इन चीज़ों पे चर्चा होती थी, और एक चर्चा मुझे खास तौर पे याद है तापस मजुमदार कमेटी के मीटिंग की, जिसमें 1:40 और 1:30 नॉर्म को लेकर बहुत बहस हुई थी, क्योंकि प्लानिंग कमीशन के जो सेक्रेटरी थे वो बहुत विरोध कर रहे थे 1:30 नॉर्म का। और उसमें वो पूरा जो दौर था, वो वहाँ प्रोफेसर तिलक थे, अगर प्रोफेसर तिलक हैं यहाँ मैं देख रही थी तो थे वो उस दिन, प्रोफेसर वर्गीस थे जो अभी न्यूपा के वाइस चांसलर हैं, और भी लोग थे। और ये बात आई कि हम जो नॉर्म्स हैं जो सबसे होने चाहिए हम उस पे जाएंगे, ना कि वो जो हमारे लिए सुविधाजनक है। और एक एक नॉर्म पे काफी मेहनत करके उसको बनाया गया था। तो वो ऐसे ही नहीं बना था, हवा में नहीं बना था, वो अधिकार को सामने रख के बना था और स्टेट के ड्यूटी को सामने लेके बना था। तो अधिकार और ड्यूटी दोनों की बात सही होती है और यहाँ भी है। तो क्या एक स्टेट का ड्यूटी है, क्या एक सरकार को करना चाहिए, उसको सामने लेके बना था। और वो अब बिल्कुल, जब हम डिजिटल टीचर की बात पे आ जाते हैं, और वो भी हम डिजिटल टीचर की बात कोई ऑफ कोर्स हम सिर्फ रूरल एरियाज में कर रहे हैं, सिर्फ सरकारी स्कूलों में कर रहे हैं, तो वो एक जो हमारा डिवीजन है वो कंप्लीट हो जाता है कि किस तरह की शिक्षा हम किसको दे रहे हैं, वो बिल्कुल कंप्लीट हो जाता है। और वो अब मतलब वो छुपा भी नहीं रहता है। इट्स नो मोर अ हिडन एजेंडा, इट्स एन ओपन एजेंडा. So that I think this budget has made it extremely clear. और ये जो पूरा डिजिटल के कौन करेगा ये डिजिटल, जैसा कहा प्रोफेसर प्रवीण झा ने कि प्राइवेटाइजेशन की बात है, तो ये तो बिल्कुल है, कौन करेगा ये, किसको, ये जो हमारे 200 चैनल्स बनेंगे ये किसके पास जाएंगे, कौन इसको चलाएंगे, कौन वो कंटेंट बनाएगा। और हर चीज में आप कंपटीशन लाते हैं। यहाँ हम कोऑपरेटिव लर्निंग की बात कर रहे हैं, यहाँ हम इंक्लूसिव लर्निंग की बात कर रहे हैं, और यहाँ आप कह रहे हैं कि टीचर्स में कंपटीशन होगा कंटेंट बनाने के लिए। यहाँ हर टीचर को इस बात के लिए समर्थ होना है। एवरी टीचर हैज टू बी capacitated to deal with mental health issues, the issues of exclusion, the issues of deprivation that she or he has faced, always face. It's not a new thing. ऐसा नहीं है कि पैंडेमिक के पहले हमारे जीवन में सारी चीजें अच्छी थी और खास करके उस तबके के जीवन में जो पहले से ही वंचित है। तो टीचर्स को हमें पूरी तरह से सेंसिटिव करना है, बनाना है, हमेशा से रहा है, हम उसमें बहुत सफल नहीं हुए हैं, लेकिन अभी उसकी जरूरत सबसे ज्यादा है। तो बाकी चीजों के साथ जो कि प्रवीण गिना रहे थे, मिड डे मील और बाकी चीजें, उसमें आप अगर टीचर ट्रेनिंग पे आएंगे तो उसमें भी खर्चा कम है। और ये बात कही जा सकती है केंद्र सरकार के द्वारा कि ये सारा खर्चा जो है ये केंद्र सरकार तो वैसे भी बहुत कम करता है, ये राज्य सरकारें करती है, तो फिर हम इतनी चिंता क्यों कर रहे हैं? 2 कारणों से कर रहे हैं। एक तो राज्य सरकारों की अपनी हालत खराब है, दूसरा कि अभी हम लोगों ने एक रिपोर्ट रिलीज किया है 1 हफ्ते या 2 हफ्ते पहले, जिसमें हम लोगों ने प्री कोविड और पोस्ट कोविड एक्सपेंडिचर ऑन चिल्ड्रन एनालाइज किया है। शिक्षा उसका 70-80% है बच्चों पे खर्चे का, तो काफी बड़ा हिस्सा है। और उसमें बहुत क्लियर है कि ज्यादातर राज्य सरकारें नहीं मेंटेन कर पाई हैं अपना खर्चा, और खर्चे का खास करके जो ग्रोथ था नॉमिनल में भी। तो अगर वो स्थिति है तो केंद्र सरकार का बजट एक टूल है जो कि दिशा निर्देश भी देता है, सिर्फ पैसे की बात नहीं है। अगर आप कहते हैं कि इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू इक्विप टीचर्स, सो देन आल्सो मैसेज गोज, in a federal polity message matters, and in a quasi federal it matters even more, जहाँ की आपके हाथ में पैसा भी है और लीडरशिप भी है, तो और भी ज्यादा मैटर करता है। और वहाँ अगर हम कहते हैं कि डिजिटल ही एकमात्र सोल्यूशन है, तो वो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स को भी उसी तरफ एक तरह से भेजता है, धकेलता है, भेजता है, जो भी। तो ये एक तो इस बजट में ये दिक्कतें तो है ही। एक और चीजें जो बात करना चाहूंगी, क्योंकि लोग बात करते हैं इकोनॉमी की, पैसा की, कैसे सारा डोल ये मान के चलते हैं कि जितना सरकारी शिक्षा पे, हेल्थ पे या जिस तरह के प्रोग्राम्स है, नरेगा पे खर्चा है, ये एक डोल है। ये भाषा बहुत प्रचलित है हमारे अपने इकोनॉमिक्स के सहयोगियों में। ये डोल नहीं है। एक तो 2-3 चीजें बहुत जरूरी है बोलना कि ये डोल क्यों नहीं है। तो शिक्षा पे खर्चे का सीधा ताल्लुक है पब्लिक स्पेंडिंग ऑन चिल्ड्रन, ये भी नहीं कि प्राइवेट। पब्लिक स्पेंडिंग ऑन चिल्ड्रन इज डायरेक्टली लिंक्ड विथ ऑल आवर डेवलपमेंट इंडिकेटर्स, और वो हम लोगों ने एनालाइज किया हुआ है, कई लोगों ने और भी किया होगा, और वो एविडेंस है वहाँ। और अगर आप देश का विकास चाहते हैं और आप हमेशा डेमोक्रेटिक डिविडेंड की बात करते हैं, तो आपको उनपे पब्लिक फंड खर्च भी करने पड़ेंगे। तो इसलिए ये कोई डोल नहीं है, ये कोई कंजम्पशन सेक्टर नहीं है। एक तो इसलिए कि उनपे एक लॉन्ग टर्म आप खर्च कर रहे हैं, और मैं ये सिर्फ ह्यूमन रिसोर्स की बात नहीं कर रही हूँ, ये मैं कह रही हूँ कि एक हमारा जो केपेबल है, ये फ्रीडम की भी बात है, ये कैपेबिलिटी की भी बात है। दूसरी बात है कि मल्टीप्लायर इफेक्ट, हम सब बात करते हैं। अभी पिछले 2 सालों में आमतौर पे लगभग कुछ लोगों को छोड़ दें तो लगभग सभी ने ये बात कही है, इकोनॉमिस्ट्स ने ये बात कही है कि अभी वापस वो मल्टीप्लायर के कॉन्सेप्ट को लाने की बात है और पब्लिक स्पेंडिंग को बढ़ाने की बात है, ताकि उसके मल्टीप्लायर इफेक्ट से कंजम्पशन बढ़े, प्राइवेट कंजम्पशन बढ़े, इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़े, जॉब्स बने और उसका एक सर्कुलर इफेक्ट हो, इनकम्स बढ़ेंगी तो इकोनॉमी जो हमारी बैठती जा रही है उसको उठाने के लिए। अभी हाल में हम लोगों ने एक स्टडी किया, मल्टीप्लायर स्टडीज बहुत कम होती हैं आजकल क्योंकि डेटा बहुत मुश्किल है, कठिन काम है। हम लोगों ने कर्नाटका को लेके किया, और सब नेशनल पे तो और भी मुश्किल है क्योंकि डेटा ही नहीं है, आधी चीजें तो RBI रिलीज ही नहीं करती है सब नेशनल। खैर हम लोगों ने एक कर्नाटका का किया और काफी हम लोगों ने मतलब काफी रिगर के साथ किया है। मतलब आवर क्लेम इज दैट इट्स नो वन हैज डन सब नेशनल विद सच रिगर। तो वहां हम लोगों ने एक सोशल अकाउंटिंग मैट्रिक्स भी होता है वो भी किया। डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिव जो इम्पैक्ट है, जैसे किसी भी जब सरकार खर्च करती है तो मल्टीप्लायर क्या है कि अगर 1 पैसा खर्च हुआ तो उसके आगे आगे जाके वो 1 पैसा आपका 100 पैसा बन सकता है अगर सही रूप से वो जा रहा है तो वो मल्टीप्लाई करता है, इसीलिए मल्टीप्लायर है। सोशल अकाउंटिंग मैट्रिक्स एक दूसरा टूल है जो हमें इस चीज को देखने में मदद करता है कि उसका डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कैसे हो रहा है, वो बट भी रहा है या पैसा बन के कुछ ही लोगों को मिल रहा है। सैम के माध्यम से हम लोगों ने ये देखा कि एजुकेशन पे जो खर्चा है, पब्लिक एजुकेशन पे, उसका डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिव इफेक्ट बहुत ज्यादा है। और वो ऑब्वियस है कि वो क्यों है। एक तो शिक्षक के कारण है, जब आप बहुत बड़े नंबर्स में इतने लोगों पे खर्च कर रहे हैं, उनके सैलरीज पे, और वो खर्च कर रहे हैं और वो बहुत पैसा नहीं है तो उनका सेविंग कम है, खर्चा ज्यादा है, तो फिर वो कंट्रीब्यूट करता है। तो एक तरह से वो इनइक्वालिटी को भी कम कर रहा है और आपके प्राइवेट कंजम्पशन को बढ़ाने में भी मदद कर रहा है। तो अगर आप पब्लिक हेल्थ, पब्लिक एजुकेशन पे खर्चा करते हैं या नरेगा पे खर्चा करते हैं तो वो सिर्फ इसलिए नहीं कि आप उन लोगों के प्रति किसी तरह की चैरिटी कर रहे हैं, इसलिए भी कि आप उससे आपके जो डिजायर्ड इंडिकेटर्स हैं वो बेहतर हो रहे हैं और आपके इकोनॉमी को भी उससे फायदा होगा, आपके अर्थव्यवस्था भी उससे मजबूत होगी। तो ये बहुत जरूरी है कि हम इन चीजों पे भी बात करें, क्योंकि हमारा बजट इन चीजों पे बिल्कुल ही साइलेंट है। ये मल्टीप्लायर मान के चलता है कि सिर्फ कैपेक्स से आता है, कैपेक्स से भी आएगा, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर से भी आएगा, ये नहीं कह सकते कि उससे नहीं आएगा, लेकिन वही एक माध्यम नहीं है। और अगर आप ज्यादा इक्विटेबल माध्यम चाहते हैं तो आपको इन पे करना बहुत जरूरी बनता है। इट्स नो मोर अ चॉइस, इट हैज टू बी देयर, जो कि नहीं है। तो उसको अगर हम लें तो इन सब चीजों को लें तो RTE तो एक तरह से कानूनन भी उसका वायलेशन है। अगर आप देखें तो डिजिटल टीचर अगर लाके और हम टीचर्स की संख्या को नहीं पूरा कर रहे हैं तो ये कानूनन भी वायलेशन है, बिना कानून को अमेंड किए हुए नहीं कर सकते हैं। और इसलिए मुझे लगता है कि जो हमारे एक्टिविस्ट फ्रेंड्स हैं उनको अब कानून का भी दरवाजा खटखटाना चाहिए। और सिर्फ बात हमारे जैसे लोग बात करके रह जाते हैं, लेकिन उससे आगे भी लड़ाई ले जानी चाहिए और वो बहुत जरूरी है। और इसमें एक बात मैं अंत में जेंडर की करना चाहूंगी कि मोबिलिटी और स्कूल का जाना लड़कियों के लिए तो खास तौर से महत्वपूर्ण है। अभी मैं आज सुबह किसी दूसरे फोरम में थी जहां बहुत मतलब बोलने का मौका नहीं मिला, लेकिन वो तकनीक पे बहुत ज्यादा जोर था और गरीबों तक कैसे टेक्नोलॉजी को पहुंचाया जाए इस पे जोर था। ऐसा नहीं है कि सारी तकनीक आ भी जाए तो भी जीवन और परिवार को परिवार को बड़े ही बेनाइन रूप में देखने पर जोर था। ऐसा भी नहीं है कि सब कुछ इतना सिंपलिस्टिक और बेनाइन है। लड़कियों को घर से निकलना उसके फंडामेंटल जरूरत है, जो कि स्कूल के कारण पूरी होती है। जो लड़कियां स्कूल नहीं जा पाती हैं वो कहीं और भी नहीं जा पाती हैं, और अगर वो नहीं मिले तो मतलब उनकी बाकी शिक्षा जो है वो सिर्फ लिटरेसी न्यूमरेसी नहीं है, शिक्षा उससे बहुत आगे की चीज है, और वो बिल्कुल ही रुक जाता है। अगर हम बहुत बढ़िया मान भी लेते हैं कि हम बहुत बढ़िया ऑनलाइन एजुकेशन कर भी दें, तो वो शिक्षा नहीं है। और लड़कियों को लेके तो हमें ये बहुत ही जरूरी है कि उनको खुला माहौल, अच्छी शिक्षा, उनकी मोबिलिटी, उनको सारे रिसोर्सेस इंश्योर करें। और ये जितनी हम बातें कर रहे हैं वो उस मामले तक उसकी तो बात ही नहीं आई है। जेंडर की कोई बात ही नहीं आई, ना एम्प्लॉयमेंट के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में, ना शिक्षा के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में। तो वो भी बहुत बड़ा गैप है इस बजट का। थैंक यू।
Thank you very much. Based on very sound practical experience and studies carried out in the field and activities carried out in the field, very illuminating. For me, so many points made are completely new. Now, the last speaker in my list is Sukanya Bose. I think if you give me time to some 10 to 15 minutes time for interventions from the floor, I shall be most grateful, because I do want to complete it before by 5 o'clock. Thank you. Sukanya.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Can I share the screen? Whoever is the host, can you please allow me to share the screen? If it's possible.
Yes, you're the co-host, so you will be able to share the screen. Yes, it's.
Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, RTE Forum. Thank you, Professor Dubey. And there has been such wonderful presentations by everybody. So I have learned a lot, and I've enjoyed all of your speaking and interventions. So, but I would like to first start by remembering Ambarish ji, who is the one who brought me into the fold of the RTE Forum. और मैं दोनों भाषा का इस्तेमाल करने की कोशिश करूंगी। हर साल 2018 to 2020 I used to get a call from Ambarish ji की प्री बजट कंसल्टेशन के लिए कुछ मुद्दे चाहिए एजुकेशन बजट को लेके। और डिस्पाइट माय स्केप्टिसिज्म आई वुड and hoping against hope, I would write those points. तो इससे I want to draw on that optimism of his, क्योंकि अभी शायद उस चीज की जरूरत भी है। ये और वो शैलेंद्र का वो पंक्ति जो तू जिंदा है तो जिंदगी की जीत पर यकीन कर, because it is such a dark moment for all of us, and the budget especially makes us pensive and sad. तो ये जो है अगर देखें तो let me just start by pointing to what Professor Jha was referring to, कि जो ड्रॉप इन प्राइवेट इनकम्स है वो इतना खतरनाक हुआ है। और ये एक स्टडी है हाउस होल्ड लेवल पे हमारे आसपास के इलाके में, मैं जहाँ रहती हूँ वहाँ के आसपास। सो दिस इज बेस्ड इन दिल्ली। और लो इनकम हाउस होल्ड्स में इस तरह का ड्रॉप इन इनकम्स है 40 ऑन एन एवरेज 40% drop in income, and this would have lasted not less than 6 months. ये किया गया था फर्स्ट वेव के बाद. नाउ आफ्टर दैट द सेकंड वेव हैज कम एंड द थर्ड वेव नाउ. और अगर आप देखें तो इन हाउस होल्ड्स के पास जो वो था, अगर जो बेसिक एंटाइटलमेंट्स के जरिए हैं, राशन कार्ड, बीपीएल कार्ड, कास्ट सर्टिफिकेट, इनकम सर्टिफिकेट, तो ये भी नहीं है. So the kind of immeasurization that we have seen is something that we have never witnessed before. हाँ, ये लोग they've been really down and out, and that is why we needed a public response even through the education budget कि ये एक social safety net का काम करेगा. So when I look at the education budget, I want to see it in terms of three questions, and I'm trying to be objective. I am not trying to be, I will look at numbers and whatever I say will be based on numbers. तो इसमें अगर हम देखें 3 अगर मुद्दे हैं कि जो जनरल स्कीम्स है and which is what informs the right to education, कहाँ तक ये इसके जो norms है, how much of it will be met. So what is happening to the expenditure on the general schemes? The secondly is what is happening to the schemes that are part of the compensatory policies of which will serve the social justice objective. अगर उन schemes की हम बात करें, क्योंकि we know that the equality of opportunity alone will not be enough and children do not come into the schools as equal. और हमारा आर्टिकल 46 भी जो है वो इस चीज़ की प्रावधान करता है कि स्पेशल प्रोविजंस हो, स्कॉलरशिप्स, हॉस्टल्स हो. तो इस पे क्या हुआ, किस तरह से एलोकेशन हुआ है. और जो तीसरा पॉइंट है विच आई थिंक इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट एंड विच इज नॉट एम्फसाइज्ड इनफ इज दिस, ये जो एलोकेटेड बजट है ये किस तरह से फ्लो करेगा, इसमें किस तरह के conditions, mechanisms are being imposed on this. Because earlier also we have had implementation issues, but what I'm trying to point out is something more than that. हमने डिजिटल की बात अभी बहुत सुनी या कहीं भी, तो उसमें हमने देखा कि किस तरह से डिजिटल का imposition into education हो रहा है. But even in terms of money flows, अगर budgetary flows देखें तो उसमें भी जो जिस तरह के एक जो central agenda है, which is that of e-governance, e-banking, digital, has actually excluded vast chunks of population. So, agar main again speaking from my own context here, if I see that MCD school में 35 से 40% बच्चों को आपको मिड डे मील का पैसा हो, यूनिफॉर्म का पैसा हो, और भी स्कॉलरशिप्स के पैसे हो, नहीं आ पाता है because the children simply do not have bank account. And as I showed you right at the beginning, the bank account is very difficult in this city because you do not have papers to prove that you are a resident of this city. तो ये जब हाल है, तब to push for more and more digital and e-banking, और एक अगर उदाहरण दूं तो ये एक शिफ्ट हुआ है, आप सब लोगों ने गौर किया होगा कि नेशनल स्कॉलरशिप पोर्टल के थ्रू ही अप्लाई करना है फॉर पोस्ट मैट्रिक स्कॉलरशिप्स. नाउ दैट इज एक्चुअली एक्सक्लूडेड अ लॉट ऑफ चिल्ड्रन who now find it very difficult to apply for this very important entitlement, and which is their support to or a bridge for higher education. तो वो जो है, so some of these systems are becoming extremely complex, remote, और जो distance between public and the government is increasing because there are actually there's no flexibility. In case you do not have a bank account, you cannot get access to this money, or there is also no feedback mechanism कि जहाँ से नीचे से जो ग्राउंड रियलिटी है उस पर उसके बेसिस में any kind of other way can be thought about, या grievance redressal mechanism. अगर हमें पैसा नहीं मिला तो what do we do, whom do we ask, because the teachers in schools are being disempowered and the entire system is being taken out of their hands. So if you go and ask the principal doesn't say that we do not know. And in states like Bihar, what is happening? Even at the district level, nobody can answer. So they will say that you have to go to Patna to ask, which is simply not possible. So you end up not even claiming that. Why am I raising these issues? Because in this forum, I presume there will be many groups who are working on the ground and who are observing these conditions. तो ये एक मौका है कि हम इन चीजों को डॉक्यूमेंट करें, because these are essential part of how the budget will be transacted. और ये हमें and you won't believe this how some of this is being reflected in the state budgets. For instance, not only Bihar, but if I see Bihar and Delhi budget, the uniform allocations on uniform have gone down from 2017-18 onwards, when all this was introduced. Successive budgets, you see that the amounts are going down, and that remains a puzzle. कि क्यों ये हो रहा है? And that has a lot to do with very centralized ways in which the money is flowing. So we need to be conscious, and we need to be talking about that too. Now, what is happening to the general schemes, those that inform the Right to Education Act and the policies? We know that, okay, before even going to the trend, more and more every year since the Samagra Shiksha, now we have Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, the budget tells you less and less. Why am I saying it? Ye Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan now subsumes what all? Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, it subsumes SMSA, it subsumes ICT in education, it subsumes KGVVs, you name it, and everything is coming under Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. So you are getting just that one figure. If I want to know how much is being spent on KGBVs per child, there's no way of knowing this either from the central budget or from the state budget. And now even the audited expenditures on SMSA is no longer, Samagra Shiksha is no longer available. So ये चीज गौर करने की बात है कि budgets are telling you less and less every year. क्योंकि everything is clubbed under bigger and bigger schemes like Samagra Shiksha. Second, coming to the trend, we have noted that SMSA allocation in this year, in this budget, is lower than what it was in 2020-21, which was right 1 month before the first lockdown. So 2 years down the line, we still haven't got back to that level. What, on the other hand, has happened is, if we compare what Professor Jha was talking about, that school education budget, what was actually spent in the year 1920 vis-a-vis what is there 2 years down the line, there's been a 1% decline. What has happened to the GDP? There's been a 14% increase in the GDP. So what this means is, this important metric we are always talking about, ki as a proportion of GDP, how much are we spending? There's been a decline by almost 13%. Yeah, and this is very important. As a proportion of GDP, school education spending by the MHRD is going down by 13% in in these 2 years. So it's a massive contraction we are talking about. Now, this contraction is, what is it going to result in? A couple of years back, we had completed a study where we found what is the kind of financing gap which exists for the RTE, for financing the right to education. And we found that that gap is around 1.4% of GDP. So in order to meet all the RTE compliant norms, including the system level expenditure, as well as equal pay for equal work, and all the deficits that needed to be met, 1.4% of the GDP was the expenditure gap which needed to be met. That gap, however, was not spread equally across states. Some states, and especially the states which we know are Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, West Bengal, MP. These were the states with the highest gaps. What this also can be seen is that in the fact that there's a massive inequality across states in the spending on per child, and this over the past 15 years, this inequality has actually grown. Yeah. So some states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Kerala at the top, whereas Bihar, it's been very, very stagnant. So what is going to happen because of this contraction in the union spending is the states which are at the bottom, and this is pre-pandemic, are going to go down further. This inequality is going to increase further, and the financing gap that we were talking about is going to go up very, very sharply. And who is going to be affected? Even within the state, it is not the rich who are going to be affected. It is the poor, the Dalit, the most marginalized, the urban deprived who are going to be affected. The schools which are on the urban fringe, those are the ones which are going to be affected. So the inequality is going to rise, the financing gaps are going to rise. So that is the picture that seems to be emerging as far as the general picture schemes goes. What is happening to the compensatory policies or the social justice objective? I just picked up 4 of these, and here what we are finding is that here probably the things are not as bad as what we saw when it came to the other segment. But then again, we have to take this with a bit of caution, because a lot of these allocations on these scholarship schemes do not represent the application in that year. It is also because the allocations might appear large because these come in cumulative amounts, and these are areas from the previous year. Here, the budgets haven't shrunk as much. Here, in fact, the recent years are looking not as bad. So I am going to, and that I do not think is just purely by design. That I think is also because in this period, especially regarding post-matric scholarships, there has been a lot of mobilization, there's been a lot of student protests, there's been a lot of uproar, even in the media, there's been a lot of pushback. So people have to raise their demand. It is not going to come on its own. And I would, have I exhausted my time, Professor?
No, please take 5 minutes more.
No, that's okay. So I will stop. So I really think that just to go back to where I started, we need to look at very clearly, with a lot of clarity, we have to look at these 3 questions, these 3 parts, which and for the third part, we actually need to look at all levels of government. We need to look at the union government, we need to look at the state, and if there are intermediate layers for which the budget is available, the intermediate layers of government, that is the local body governments. But for that, the main thing is to look at it from the below, to capture the voices from below, those of the teachers, those of the students, those of people working people working at the bottom, so that we can really build a movement towards, and a well-informed movement, so that we can give a pushback to this kind of what can be called a very insensitive, what has been termed as very insensitive and careless, non-serious union budget. Yeah, let me stop here.
Thank you, Sukanya, very much. I think we have 10 minutes to 5 o'clock. I can extend it by 5 to 10 minutes more. So let's devote the next 15 to 20 minutes for comments from the floor. Anybody who would like to take the floor and speak? Is there an arrangement for that?
Yes, sir. So anybody who would like to speak may raise their hands, their digital hands, and we will unmute your microphone.
Okay. So anyone wanting to speak? We don't have any, it seems.
We have Professor Poonam Batra if she would like to make a comment. We also have Pratibha from CBG.
No, please
okay.
don't take over from me. Don't take over from me.
Sure,
Otherwise,
sir, sure.
it will go on for the next 1 hour or so.
Okay, right, sir. Sure.
It's not correct. It's not correct. Yeah.
Sure.
I have given a call to those who would like to speak, and you should not single out who will speak and who will not speak.
Sir, done.
Anyone? So I don't see anyone starting to speak. And with this, I would like to conclude the, not conclude here is some, I think somebody should propose a vote of thanks. But before that, I would like to thank Sukanya for her comments. I think she has made some extremely good points about the budget. And she has made also some very good suggestions as to how we should go about achieving some of the very minimum things that we can achieve in the given circumstances. And I particularly liked her remark that now the budgets are telling us less and less. And we have to ponder over this issue as to how it is so. I think she has also put the recent increase in the budget for education in the right perspective. That is this increase of 6,000 crores or so is for Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan as a whole, in which there is a whole lot of things there, and progress made, goals set, and in some of the kind of areas other than elementary education, for which this amount can also be used, is so minimal that one can't think what can happen in any of this sector. Sorry, if the entire additional amount is spent on that. And I give you just one example: secondary education. Can we universalize secondary education by, even if the entire amount of this is spent under the Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan? What a tremendous leeway there is in the secondary education, and what it needs in terms of resources, you have to consider, and you have to see this increase in that context. As a matter of fact, the government can very well spread this additional amount into the various other sectors, and leaving very little for right to education. And this should also be borne in mind. And finally, I would like to conclude by reiterating the point that I made in the beginning, that if there is no objective, there is no time frame, there is no phasing of how things should be done, then the government cannot be held accountable to anything. And even if nothing is done, nobody will be held responsible for it, which goes against the very spirit of the RTE Act. May I conclude with a line that I had read during my high school days from a poem, which is a book, which is a whole long poem by Dinkar, the Hindi Kavi. And he had said long time ago in the early 50s that Lakshya kya, Uddeshya kya, Arth kya Arth, yadi nahi kya to Vigyan ka ashram that. So the meeting is, before concluding meeting, sorry, I would request Mitranjan or Srijita, whosoever has been designated, to propose a vote of thanks. Srijita.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Sir, Mitra Ranjan ji, sir, thank you so much. Sir, Mitra Ranjan ji would be giving the vote of thanks. Mitra Ranjan ji, over to you.
थैंक्स श्रीजिता. एक्चुअली इस पूरे वेबिनार के में जितनी महत्वपूर्ण बातें आई और हमारे सारे प्रतिभागियों की तरफ से, जो भी पैनलिस्ट थे हमारे, उन लोगों ने जिस तरीके से पूरे करीने से एक एक बारीक चीजों का विश्लेषण किया, उसके लिए वाकई इस वंडरफुल डिस्कशन के लिए मैं सबका धन्यवाद करना चाहूँगा, हमारे सारे जो पैनलिस्ट हैं. और काफ़ी इसमें बातें उभर करके आई है, खास करके डिजिटल एजुकेशन के मोड को लेकर के काफ़ी सारी बातें आई हैं और जिस पे पूरे सरकार का जोर है. मेरा मानना ये है कि राइट टू एजुकेशन फोरम की तरफ से जमीनी स्तर पे एक व्यापक आंदोलनात्मक कार्यवाहियों का एक सिलसिला शुरू होना चाहिए, जो कि शिक्षा के मूलभूत उद्देश्यों को और राइट टू एजुकेशन को जमीनी स्तर पे क्रियान्वित करने के लिए आगे बढ़े. तो इन बातों के साथ ही और इस आशा के साथ कि हम अपने पूरे देश भर में और अपने तमाम राज्यों के भीतर इसको ले जाएंगे अपनी कतारों के भीतर, और इस बजट पे खास करके जब अब स्टेट बजट आने वाले हैं तो वहां पे राज्यों में हमें ये चर्चा करनी चाहिए, हमें इस चर्चा को ले जाना चाहिए. और हमने ये हमारे पूरे योजना में है भी कि अलग अलग राज्यों में हम इस पूरी चर्चा को आगे ले जाएंगे. हमारे यहाँ पे जो बजट के विशेषज्ञ हैं, खास करके उनसे अपेक्षा रहेगी कि वो हमें इस मामले में थोड़ा गाइडेंस देंगे, थोड़ा मार्गदर्शन देंगे. और इसके साथ ही बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया प्रोफेसर दुबे जी और हमारे प्रोफेसर प्रवीण झा जी, सुकन्या बोस जी, ज्योत्सना झा जी और कॉमरेड निरंजन, सारे लोगों का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. और इस पूरे प्रोग्राम को सफलतापूर्वक संचालित करने के लिए टेक्निकली शाहीन भाई और सृजिता का भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, और हमारे सारे साथियों का बहुत धन्यवाद इसमें प्रतिभाग करने के लिए और 2 घंटे तक लगातार हमारे साथ बने रहने के लिए. बहुत शुक्रिया.
So now Srijita can shut us off.
Yes, I'll end